In the 1950s, newly decolonized nations stepped onto the world stage only to find themselves under an atomic shadow. They faced a terrifying choice: align with Washington or align with Moscow. Refusing to choose meant risking isolation or total destruction in a nuclear crossfire. Seeking an alternative, delegates from 29 Asian and African countries gathered in Indonesia for the 1955 Bandung Conference. This meeting brought together newly independent states to discuss their role in the Cold War and their path toward economic development. Together, they demanded a voice independent of the two superpowers. This map illustrates the geographic spread of the movement's early pioneers. Leaders like India's Nehru, Indonesia's Sukarno, Egypt's Nasser, Yugoslavia's Tito, and Ghana's Nkrumah proposed a third way focused on the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence. These principles centered on mutual respect for sovereignty, equality, and strict non-interference in domestic affairs. By 1961, this coalition formally organized into the Non-Aligned Movement, or NAM. It became a diplomatic forum for countries that refused to formally align with or against any major power bloc. For nations previously relegated to the periphery of global power, it was a coordinated strategy to reclaim their agency. Long before the Cold War divided the globe, geography forced similar calculations high in the Himalayas. In the 18th century, King Prithvi Narayan Shah, the founder of unified Nepal, looked at his country's precarious borders. To the north sat the massive Qing Empire of China, to the south the expansionist British East India Company. Evaluating his position, he famously described Nepal as a yam between two boulders. This diagram illustrates that physical constraint. The yam theory is a doctrine of survival. It requires absolute caution and maintaining balanced ties, so neither giant perceives the yam as a threat or a proxy for the other. Today, those boulders are modern economic juggernauts. India and China possess massive trade networks and military capabilities that exert constant pressure on Nepal's borders. When the non-aligned movement emerged, Nepal viewed the global coalition as an international framework for the exact survival strategy it had practiced for 2 centuries. Throughout the mid-20th century, the non-aligned movement grew into the second-largest international organization after the UN. It focused its collective weight on supporting decolonization and protecting the independence of developing nations. Back in the 1950s in Nepal, following the fall of the isolationist Rana regime, the nation entered a fragile political transition. The country needed a new diplomatic balance to safely navigate a rapidly changing Asia. In 1959, Prime Minister B.P. Koirala used the principles of non-alignment to project an image of sovereign independence. Koirala refused to join military alliances, while actively engaging with the international community on his own terms. Koirala pursued a strategy of diplomatic diversity. At a time when many Asian nations hesitated, he established formal diplomatic ties with Israel. It was a clear demonstration that Nepal would make its own judgments, free from superpower dictates. Refusing to support one power bloc over another, Nepal sought to avoid the Cold War's tumult. For a small nation flanked by giants, strict neutrality was the only viable path to protect its sovereignty. Then, the Berlin Wall fell. The 1991 collapse of the Soviet Union dismantled the rigid two-pole power structure that had defined the concept of non-alignment. Without two distinct poles to avoid, the core premise of the movement faced severe criticism. Today, analysts argue that rapid globalization and deep economic interdependencies have made the policy of non-alignment effectively impossible. As this network map illustrates, former non-aligned states are heavily tied to major powers through trade and debt obligations. Political scientist Atindra Dahal argues that clinging to strict non-alignment paralyzes foreign policy in an era defined by complex cross-border economic conflicts. Internal divisions have also weakened the movement. Severe regional disputes among member states and crippling economic constraints have displaced the universal goals that once united the coalition. The original threat of nuclear war has largely been replaced by the reality of economic dependency. This raises a central question. Can a survival tool designed for the Cold War function in today's fractured multipolar economy? While the Cold War ended, regional conflicts and economic exploitation did not. Developing nations still face external pressures to compromise their natural resources and international voting power. In response, many small states have shifted towards strategic autonomy. Instead of acting as passive buffer states, they are positioning themselves as active bridges between competing global powers. Nations achieve this through hedging. They accept infrastructure investments, like China's Belt and Road Initiative, a global trade development strategy, or the United States Millennium Challenge Corporation, a foreign assistance agency, while resisting the political demands attached to the funds. Despite its fractures, the non-aligned movement still commands 120 votes in the United Nations. It provides the Global South with a collective platform to negotiate development justice and climate action on a global scale. The strategy has evolved. Small states now focus on maximizing their freedom of action within a dense global web. Modern Nepal sits between three massive forces: India, China, and the United States. This diagram highlights those competing pressures. Nepal balances deep cultural ties with India, massive transit projects funded by China's Belt and Road Initiative, and development grants flowing from the American Millennium Challenge Corporation. With three global heavyweights investing billions into its borders, quiet neutrality is no longer enough. To safeguard its sovereignty, Nepal requires a unified approach where all political parties harmonize their foreign policy goals. The principles from the 1955 Bandung Conference persist. They provide a framework for small states to maintain their sovereignty through agile diplomacy. The boulders have only grown heavier over the last 2 centuries, yet Nepal remains intact, navigating the shifting currents of global power through sheer diplomatic agility.